You think winter in feudal Japan was quiet and peaceful? It wasn't. If you were born into a village, winter decided whether you lived or disappeared. No heating. No supermarkets. No help coming. Survival wasn't about bravery, it was about planning months ahead and never making a single careless mistake. Let me show you how ordinary villagers prepared for a season that didn't forgive anyone. If you think winter survival in feudal Japan started when the first snow fell, you'd already be in trouble. For villagers, winter began months earlier, usually while the sun was still warm and rice fields were green. Summer wasn't a break. It was a countdown. Every household knew exactly how long winter could last and roughly how much food one person could eat without starving everyone else. Rice wasn't just food. It was currency, insurance, and anxiety rolled into one. Eat too much in autumn, and spring might never come for you. Vegetables were dried and hung from rafters like edible decorations. Daikon lined ceilings. Greens were salted into barrels. Fish was smoked or buried in miso. Nothing went to waste. Throwing food away in October was basically announcing you planned to die in February. If you were careless, the village noticed. People remembered who ate too freely, who didn't help preserve, who thought it'll probably be fine. It usually wasn't. And if you're wondering whether this was stressful, imagine budgeting groceries for 5 months with no shops, no deliveries, and no second chances. That was normal life. By the time winter actually arrived, survival had already been decided. The snow just revealed who planned well and who didn't. And once the cold truly set in, planning stopped mattering, because now it was all about heat. If you walked into a feudal Japanese farmhouse expecting cozy winter vibes, you'd be disappointed immediately. These homes weren't designed to feel warm. They were designed to waste as little heat as possible. Comfort was a luxury. Survival was the goal. Walls were thick. Windows were tiny. Floors were dirt or packed earth, which sounds miserable until you realize dirt doesn't steal heat as fast as wood or stone. Furniture was minimal, because empty space is easier to warm than clutter. If it feels a bit like living in a storage shed, that's because function always came first. At the center of the house was the orori, a sunken hearth that never really went out. It cooked food, dried clothes, smoked fish, and kept fingers from going numb. Everyone gathered around it. Privacy disappeared in winter. You slept close, worked close, and argued close. Personal space was a springtime concept. If you're thinking, I'd just light a bigger fire, that's adorable. Firewood was rationed carefully. Burn too much in January, and February punished you for it. So villagers learned to layer clothing, share body heat, and accept discomfort as normal. You didn't beat the cold. You negotiated with it. And once warmth was barely under control, the next problem showed up quietly: food. Winter food was about endurance, not enjoyment. If you're imagining winter meals in feudal Japan as cozy bowls of comfort food, let's reset expectations. Winter food wasn't about flavor. It was about not collapsing halfway through the season. Taste was optional. Calories were not. Meals became repetitive fast. Rice was stretched with millet or barley. Soups were thick, vegetable heavy, and familiar in the same way a Monday feels familiar. Pickles showed up constantly. Fermented greens, salted daikon, miso soaked everything. If it could survive months in a barrel, it was invited to dinner. Fresh food? Rare. Meat? Even rarer. And yet, people survived because these meals were designed for endurance. Fermentation kept digestion working when diets were limited. Pickles replaced minerals lost to cold and hard labor. Hot broths conserved energy by warming the body instead of forcing it to generate heat. If you skipped meals or complained too much, your body paid for it quickly. Weakness meant you couldn't work. And if you couldn't work, you didn't earn your share. So winter eating wasn't indulgent. It was strategic. You ate to stay upright, not satisfied. And once food was rationed and meals were simplified, villagers faced the next challenge, managing the cold itself, day after day, without burning through everything they had left. If you're thinking villagers tried to beat winter, that's modern thinking. Feudal Japan didn't beat the cold. It managed it, negotiated with it, and accepted that being uncomfortable was normal. Clothing was layered, not fashionable. Straw coats went over cotton. Hands were wrapped. Feet were shoved into straw sandals that froze solid overnight and had to be remade constantly. If your shoes didn't fall apart at least once a week, you probably weren't walking enough. Firewood was treated like gold. You didn't burn more just because you felt cold. You burned what you could afford. Some rooms were deliberately left unheated to preserve fuel, meaning parts of the house were basically decorative iceboxes until spring. Movement slowed. People learned to sit still, conserve energy, and work only when necessary. Running around to warm up just meant you'd need more food later. Complaining didn't help either. The cold didn't care. And if you're wondering whether anyone enjoyed this, the answer is no. Endurance was the skill, not toughness. Once villagers learned how to live with the cold instead of fighting it, another truth became painfully clear. Winter wasn't just dangerous because of temperature. It was dangerous because of people, and surviving it depended on who stood beside you. If you think villagers survived winter through rugged individualism, you wouldn't have lasted a week. Feudal Japanese villages made it through winter because no one did it alone, whether they liked it or not. Work was shared. Food was watched. Children drifted between houses like communal property. If someone fell sick, neighbors stepped in, not out of kindness, but because losing one worker made everyone's winter harder. Survival was math, not sentiment. And yes, people noticed everything. Who helped with harvest? Who skipped preservation work? Who suddenly needed extra food when snow fell? Winter had a long memory, and reputations mattered more than strength. If you were generous in summer, doors opened for you in January. If you were selfish, winter reminded everyone. Quietly. This wasn't some ideal village harmony. People argued. Resentment simmered. But when roads disappeared under snow, cooperation wasn't optional. It was policy. Isolation was dangerous. A lone household had no backup if illness hit or food ran low. That's why villages clustered tightly, shared resources, and watched out for one another, sometimes uncomfortably closely. And even with community support, winter still claimed lives. Because there was one enemy no amount of cooperation could fully stop. If you think cold was the deadliest part of winter, here's the uncomfortable truth: it usually wasn't. Illness was. And it didn't arrive dramatically. It crept in quietly, one cough, one fever, one small cut at a time. There were no village doctors on call. No medicine cabinets. No antibiotics. A chest infection, a stomach illness, or an infected scratch could slowly knock someone out of daily work, and once that happened, things spiraled fast. Weak body meant less food. Less food meant weaker body. Winter loved that loop. Villagers knew this, which is why prevention mattered more than treatment. Hot meals weren't comfort food. They were protection. Fermented foods helped digestion when diets were limited. Clean water was guarded carefully. Cuts were wrapped. Exhaustion was avoided when possible. If you're wondering whether people just pushed through, sometimes they tried. And sometimes that's exactly what killed them. What made this worse was timing. Illness in winter was harder to recover from because the body was already under stress. There was no surplus energy to burn. And even then, people kept going. They had to. Because winter didn't care if you were sick. And just when villagers thought the worst was behind them, one final truth hung over every household: spring was never guaranteed. Here's the part no one liked to talk about out loud. Spring was hoped for, not promised. Every village entered winter knowing that not everyone would still be there when the snow melted. This wasn't pessimism. It was experience. People planned, shared, endured, and still, some winters took more than others. If you were living there, you'd feel it in the silence. Fewer footsteps outside. One house that stayed dark too long. A name no longer spoken at meals. Winter didn't always end with celebration. Sometimes it ended with quiet acceptance. That's why rituals mattered so much. Prayers, festivals, offerings, they weren't just tradition. They were psychological survival. Hope, when you had very little else. Believing that effort meant something helped people keep going when bodies were exhausted and morale was thin. And when spring finally did arrive, it wasn't gentle joy. It was relief. Mud instead of snow. Cold rain instead of ice. Work instead of waiting. If you made it through winter, you didn't feel victorious. You felt lucky. That's the truth most romantic versions leave out. Feudal Japanese villages didn't survive because life was beautiful. They survived because people planned carefully, endured discomfort, leaned on each other, and accepted that survival itself was the achievement. And if you had lived there, that would have been enough. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, but that was centuries ago. What does any of this have to do with me? More than you'd expect. Villages in feudal Japan survived brutal winters without central heating, supermarkets, medicine, or emergency services. They did it by planning ahead, accepting limits, and relying on each other instead of convenience. And that mindset is something we've mostly lost. Today, we are shocked when a delivery is late or the power goes out for a few hours. Imagine facing months where there was no backup plan. No resupply. No help coming from outside the village. You prepared properly, or winter taught you a lesson you didn't forget. What's striking isn't how tough these people were. It's how realistic they were. They didn't expect comfort. They expected hardship, and they organized their lives around managing it. If you dropped into that world, your biggest challenge wouldn't be the cold. It would be adjusting your expectations. Learning to slow down. To share. To accept discomfort without panic. Feudal villagers didn't survive because they were stronger than you. They survived because they understood something simple and uncomfortable. Nature doesn't negotiate. But people can. And that might be the most modern lesson hidden in the coldest winters of the past. So now you know, feudal Japanese villages didn't survive winter through comfort or luck. They survived through planning, restraint, and community, knowing that spring was never guaranteed. That's the part history often skips. If this video changed how you see everyday survival in the past, hit like so more people can discover it. And if you want more grounded, myth-free looks at how ordinary people actually lived through extreme conditions, subscribe and turn on notifications. Let me know in the comments which harsh environment or forgotten way of life you want to explore next.